Relationships are a weird thing because they require a level of trust and a level of transparency, to be fair, vulnerability, all that kind of stuff. One result of which is obviously you get a lot out of it. On the other hand, you can get burnt by it, but that's not necessarily what we're here to talk about. It's kind of more the unhealthy like dynamic that a lot of people will have experienced, especially in recent years, with how relationships are perceived to be, what they're supposed to be in some ways, and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of it is typically just what other people think a relationship should be, rather than maybe what yours should be. A lot of the time, it's judgment kind of based on heteronormity. So, having kids, having a wife, husband, whatever it might be, whatever the heteronorm is really, and then the expression of that really. Now, the result of which is if you don't fit into that like category, it's a bit awkward in terms of a few things. So the first thing is obviously the fact that if it's not a heteronormal like normal relationship, i.e., it's a queer relationship or anything along those, there's automatically that level of potential tension amongst other people just about that, whether it's people you care about, whether it's people you don't care about, if it's just random people on the street. Then you've also got the whole thing of like, if it is a heteronormative relationship, it's like the expectation that you're going to have children and other things like that. And ultimately, this is really frustrating because everyone has their own way of viewing the world. And everyone obviously has, circumstances that they live in and want to live in. And the result of which is when you've got other people telling you what you should/shouldn't be doing, or, like how you should be living because it's what's expected of you for some reason by some other person, it often gets a bit muddied. And because every situation is obviously slightly different, the general consensus view, if there is one at all, might not actually be the right thing for you or your situation. And ultimately a relationship, most of the time, if we are going off like the heteronormal like relationship that's monogamous, it's between two people and you basically navigate it from there, what works best for you, and find strategies of basically just making it work. A lot of the time with social media these days, people will present like a really idealized version of their relationship and it's all perfect and, like a picture of them at dinner and a picture of them on holiday and all this kind of stuff to make things look perfect. But in reality, that isn't the case most of the time. Now, the result of which is you get like a lot of pressure from society, from other people when you're seeing their relationships online or seeing how other people are acting. And to be honest, as someone that isn't like that romantic in terms of not really someone that dates, not really someone that does any of that stuff, not really a fan of people massively for multiple reasons. And ultimately it's just that kind of thing where you're expected to trust other people and other people kind of give you their 5 pence, their opinions on what you maybe should be doing, how you should be doing it, and why you should be doing it. And most time it's like completely unimportant. It's completely opposed to what you want, but you feel this level of societal pressure to be a certain way or like a certain person or like a certain group of people because it's supposedly what you're meant to do. And it's frustrating, to be honest. There's a level which, like, it's always been the case. It was like the stereotype back in the day was that grandparents would always be like, oh, are you married yet? And obviously, well, that's less of a thing these days. It still does kind of kick about. And, even you'll have, like, friends and stuff that will, like, rib you, like, oh, we've never seen you with, like, a partner or anything like that. And, like, on the one hand, obviously, as someone that doesn't have many friends, mainly out of personal choice, to be honest, and that sounds like a massive quote, but it is kind of true. Not someone that particularly likes people. It does feel like there's this level of pressure from people around you that are like, in long-term relationships that you should be too. And it's it's just kind of frustrating, you know, being in a position as someone that doesn't necessarily adhere to like heteronormity, that then it's like it like expected almost of you to just be like everyone else. If it's not, you're weird. I mentioned it on the video the other day about like the Pride community and how like weird of a concept it is, because it's so like there's so many different types of people in said community, and it basically just feels like a blanket term for like, oh, you're not cishet, therefore you're this thing. And kind of how, not necessarily problematic, because maybe that's over, like, that's giving the idea too much power, but it feels like you're just in the box of other kind of thing, you know? You're not adhering to the kind of rules of the game, therefore you're this, that. It's the fourth, really. So, well, on the one hand, yeah, people's expectations of you may be for decent reasons. They feel like it is, you know, even if it is just like casual ribbing. It's also that thing of like enforcing social norms, where it is kind of, yeah, wife, kids, you know, raising the next generation. And that ultimately is how the species is going to survive. If we're looking at it from like an analytical perspective. It's obviously encouraged because, you know, it's that way. But if you consider this fact as well, humans, there are a lot of us now. We're not necessarily needed for like reproduction. Not everyone has to reproduce equally. Heteronorms, it's becoming more and more of a thing these days where adherence to heteronorms isn't actually as important, certainly not in the West. And sure, while a lot of people will be cynical about this and say this is the kind of epitome of degeneracy, you also have to look at it from the other perspective of it's just an expression of people being themselves. One example was used a few years ago in reference to the like increase in trans people, and one argument was, well, in the 60s in the UK, it was like encouraged that people like would write with their right hand. Can't really remember why. It was just kind of a thing that was enforced in schools. And over the years, over time, more people would like just start writing with their left hand who are actually left-handed. And it's like they're saying that these days is kind of where we're at, or going towards, with people that just aren't heteronormal. So i.e. where we're at in terms of people just choosing to be what they want to be rather than adhering purely to like social standards. Now, while obviously most people do adhere to social standards because it's how the world works, like you kind of can't just do your own thing all the time. There is a social contract for a reason. We all, to some extent, you know, subscribe to it. But it's a bit disappointing, you know, when you're getting grief from people a lot, like, oh, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you acting like this? Why aren't you being more like this person, that person? And it's like, well, because at the end of the day, we're not each other. We're different people. We're all got our own different views on what maybe life should or shouldn't be. And ultimately, it feels like a lot of people are very concerned with other people's lifestyles when it's not really their business. Obviously, there's like an allegory for a lot of things, but certainly when it comes to like relationship life or, God forbid, even like sex life, it just feels like people are weirdly invasive about it. And maybe they always have been. This probably isn't a new thing. It certainly isn't in terms of like pressure from like family and like, you know, those near and dear, that, you know, you should be acting in accordance with certain, you know, values or ways of doing things. But it's just a bit like, it's a bit frustrating, you know, that people feel like they're entitled to tell you what to do, how to do it, when they themselves are not exactly in an idealized situation. And, you know, there's that whole saying, like, people in their lane, people telling you to stay in the lane, and they can't even drive. It feels like that sometimes, man. Like, people will be in the most, like, deformed relationship from the outside looking in, or vice versa. They will look like they're in a really good relationship, and then when you actually talk to them about it, they're like, oh no, this is like dysfunctional in this way, that way, and the fourth way. And ultimately, as I said earlier, it's not really anyone else's business. If they're telling you, then it kind of is, but like, for the most part, that kind of stuff is private, and it's private for a reason. It probably should be, you know, like when we do see these like these cases with like Amber Heard and stuff and Johnny Depp, if you remember a few years ago, which was really messy. And that's kind of like how it feels just talking to people about their relationships. It's not really anyone else's business besides theirs. But it's interesting how many people, you know, comment on it and like, you know, oh, you should be doing this, or that should be the way it's handled, and all this kind of stuff. It's really just frustrating. So to wrap up, basically, heteronormativity, there's nothing wrong with it, obviously, but there is kind of to an extent when it's maybe forced upon's the wrong word, but strongly expected of you, despite you just being like, nah, that's just not the play, really. It's not the one. It's disappointing. Obviously, it's just a bit of a facade, it feels like, when people are telling you what to do. It's that catch-22 of like, most people are just pretending most of the time that they know what they're doing. And while, yeah, some people do probably have really strong feelings on certain things like relationships and how they should be, how they shouldn't be, but from living a decently long time on this earth and the amount of people you'll meet who are like, oh yeah, they want this, that, the other, and they're really abhorred by certain things, and then actually they're more likely to be taking part in that. I had a mate once, we're not friends anymore, but they were like really against cheating and like really against like sexual assault and stuff, and yet they sexually assaulted someone and tried to get someone to cheat with them. And it's just like, it's just really fucking grim how people act when it comes to relationships and this holier than thou thing. And ultimately we're all just monkeys, really. We're all just like evolved monkeys with, you know, some people are act a certain way, some people are more horny than others, some people are more, you know, passionate, some people, you know, this, that, the other. People do things. Like, going back, there was that like whole Wilbur Soot thing. We were talking about this morning, actually, in the kitchen for some reason. Like how he would unconsensually bite his partner and stuff. And it's just like, this is why, personally, I'm quite cynical about like relationships, because you just see so many that are like, while on paper they're great, and then these people are telling you, oh, you should really be in this relationship status, or you should be looking for someone. And it's like, well, on the one hand, you don't know, like, we don't know each other very well. So even if we are family or friends or whatever we might be, it doesn't really give you the right to tell someone else how they should be, what kind of relationship they should be having, and who they should be having it with. And furthermore, it's like, there's enough examples to suggest that relationships really are not that good. And like, as someone that's been in like a pretty long-term platonic relationship with someone, like a good 4 years now, and like, that's ultimately what's good. Like, that's happiness. And being told constantly, it's like, no, you need to like become official or do this, that, and the fourth. It's just stupid, and it's really tiring, and honestly quite sick of it. Just this whole expectation, partially because of like social media, where people are like relationship goals and stuff, and it's kind of fugazi. You know, ironically enough, Skepta made a fairly decent song about this called Same Old Story. And it's just like how so many people these days are so paranoid about relationships, about how, you know, like, if something's too good, you start overthinking it, like, this is too good, what's the catch? Or, you know, even, you know, people just doing things because it's expected of them to be in a relationship and forcing themselves, rushing into it. And, I don't know, it's just, obviously you always get, like, judgment. You always get people that are holier than thou that are trying to tell you what to do because it makes them feel important. But, yeah, that's just life, isn't it? Anyway, it's a bit of a rant. It's probably a lot of repetition in this, sorry about that. Just kind of had to get that off, because, yeah, I had a bit of a weird day today. A bit of a weird morning. But yeah, thanks for listening. If you're still listening, God knows why. This is just a bit of a fucking ramble session, to be honest. And, yeah. Well, have a good one. That was an embarrassing death. Whoops. Okay, well, see ya. What's that? Cheers.